It is now 9 a.m. and we are going to start off today's proceedings with the party leaders' debate on EU affairs. And let me start by welcoming the diplomatic corps up there and also the general public as well. Welcome to the Swedish Riksdag. Debating rules. The Prime Minister opens the debate with a presentation of the government's priorities in its work with EU matters. This address may take no longer than 15 minutes. The party leader for the largest opposition party is given the floor for no longer than 7 minutes. The other party leaders are given the floor for no longer than 5 minutes each in order of party size. There is no right of reply to these first addresses. Following this, there is a second round of addresses of no more than 2 minutes each. There is a free right of reply to the second address for those participating in the debate. In the order of size of their party, the dual method is applied with a right of reply for no longer than 1 minute per rejoinder, a total of 4 minutes per dual. So, Ulf Kristersson, Prime Minister for the Moderate Party, please. The floor is yours. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Europe and our values, our way of life, these are things that are worth defending because together we have, and also individually, we have built, our countries have built up societies that are amongst the very best to live in. And Europe is, as we all know, far from being without problems, but together we have done much more than got things much more right than wrong, and we also know that none of our strengths may be taken for granted. We know that which is good must be safeguarded, developed and defended. Now, we are living in an era when European cooperation is more important than it has been for a long time, and Europe must therefore take a much stronger responsibility ourselves for our own security, competitiveness and future welfare. So appeasement and inertia are both dangerous today. The full-scale invasion of our continent is almost in its 5th year, almost as long as the Second World War. Russia is aiming its attacks at civilian targets, playgrounds, hospitals and schools. Children are being killed, are being kidnapped and taken to Russia. Families are being torn apart. It is a brutality beyond human boundaries. Europe's most important task is to support Ukraine. This is a major aspect here in this question, is that we all in this Riksdag do support together Ukraine in this important task. On the 27th of October, we, Sweden and Ukraine, debated our cooperation with the letter of intent that President Zelensky and I signed about the long-term construction of a new Ukrainian Air Force, a possible export deal of between 100 to 150 Swedish Gripen aircraft, which is the best fighter aircraft in the world. Sweden is one of the world's biggest military donors to Ukraine. In absolute terms, we contribute more than countries like France, Italy and Spain. We contribute with tanks, artillery and air defense, including air-based equipment and training, and we do it with pride. But more countries must follow suit and do more, because the Ukrainian people are not just defending their own freedom, they are also defending ours. And we will remain at Ukraine's side, on the side of freedom and democracy, on the right side of history, and we'll do it for as long as it takes. On the 23rd of October, the EU's 19th package of sanctions was adopted. Sweden has pressed for sanctions against Russian natural gas and the Russian shadow fleet, as well as giving the dividends from frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. But the EU needs to increase the pace regarding the phasing out of fossil fuels from Russia and need to ensure that more of the frozen Russian assets are used to provide long-term financing for Ukraine. It is Russia that shall pay for the damage that it has caused Ukraine. Sweden has consistently stood up for the conviction that the EU shall be open to further countries when there are countries that wish to join and also live up to all the requirements. This is a merit-based process, and we deeply regret Hungary's iniquitous blocking of Ukraine's path towards membership. Mr. Speaker, cross-border crime is also a challenge for both Sweden and us all. Narcotics and weapons are smuggled across country borders. Money is laundered, moved, hidden. Murders in Sweden are being ordered from the Spanish Costa del Sol. The government is serious about this and is doing what is required to combat serious crime, organised crime. The political laxity against gang crime, that came to an end when this government took over responsibility for Sweden. So the same actions conducted here at home are needed in the EU. The government is working hard with measures to, for example, seize criminal gains. We have tried to put pressure on the EU to reinforce the confiscation directive so that we are able to get at the luxury goods, the status symbols of the criminal gangs. We have increased our efforts to get at the leaders of the gangs. Only this year, over 200 wanted criminals have been arrested abroad. So the message to serious criminals hiding abroad is, we will find you, we will arrest you, and we will lock you up. Security and safety within our borders require better control of our outer external borders. We remember what things were like 10 years ago. Sweden received 325,000 asylum seekers in just a few years. Today we are seeing the consequences of a high level of immigration combined with failed integration in Sweden as well as in the rest of Europe. The government has carried out the biggest reorganisation of Swedish migration policy ever, with the result that asylum-related immigration into Sweden is at its lowest since 1985. It was an entirely necessary reorganisation. We are in the process of negotiating the important changing legislation. Only every fifth person who's been given a decision stating that they must leave the EU do so. A no must be a no, and the government will continue to drive and pursue this process. Mr. Speaker, Sweden and Europe are having to make a number of major investments in infrastructure, clean electricity, research and development, rearmament of our defence, and all this costs money. Our resources are not provided automatically. What is required is an agenda of action for enhanced growth and competitiveness in the whole of Europe. The government worked hard during the Swedish EU presidency, and we laid the foundations of the European competitive agenda that has now really taken off. And the EU Commission has presented 6 simplification packages. A further two are in the pipeline, and our government have put forward real proposals for simplification that help rather than be a burden on business, new technology and AI. However, we are very concerned about the slow pace in the EU system as a whole. When the Commission's simplification agenda is met by 1,000 proposed amendments in the European Parliament, I would say that that is a sign of obstruction. For the EU to be a relevant global actor, the pace must be enhanced. The European economy needs simpler rules now. So I very much urge the parties in this chamber to now have a serious talk with your party colleagues in Brussels. Sweden must be able to count on also Swedish members of the European Parliament contribute to the simplification of rules as well as to competitiveness in the EU. Access to capital is decisive, and the EU has incredible potential here. An amazing 11,000 billion euros of the financial assets of households are today lying around in bank accounts or in cash. If you just a fraction of that amount is invested in European growing companies, that would make a real difference. Sweden, I would say, is a role model here. Through our pension system, our ISK investment saving accounts, for example, there we raise the level of tax-free savings to 300,000 Swedish krona in 2020. It's one of the best capital markets in Europe, and now the European Commission want more countries to follow suit. Sweden has for a long time been a strong voice in the EU in favour of free trade. We are one of Europe's and the world's most free trade friendly countries. And at the same time that the US administration has redrawn the trade policy playing field and leading to an increase in uncertainty, we are seeing a greater interest in other parts of the world concluding free trade agreements with the EU. The EU is now taking important steps in these free trade negotiations with, for example, Mexico, Indonesia, Mercosur. Negotiations with India are also progressing rapidly. Mr. Speaker, Sweden is the country in the EU which has the lowest level of emissions per capita. And in the our predictions, the government submitted predictions that the emissions will be lower than they were in 2022 when we took power. So we have an ambitious climate agenda in the EU, and it goes hand in hand with increased competitiveness. By acting together at the EU level, we are contributing to reducing emissions better than if we all were acting separately on our own. Now we need to agree on emission reductions by the year 2040, on the way to climate neutrality by the year 2050. The government supports the European Commission's proposal regarding reducing levels to 1990 levels. And that is a goal that is now part of our basis then of the EU's commitment at the climate summit in Brazil. However, all countries need to be on board and do the job, because otherwise this is just not realistic. In order to live up to the EU's goals for carbon dioxide sequestration in forest and land areas, this would mean that forest logging would be stopped for a year in Sweden. That would have serious consequences for Swedish jobs and our economic growth. The EU's climate policy cannot just be based on Swedish forests being used as a carbon sink for countries with lower climate ambitions. Those who are in favour of that, well, they must answer the question: how many jobs are to disappear? How many Swedish forestry workers are to be banned from felling trees? Those parties in this Riksdag who wish to sacrifice Swedish interests should be clear on that point. The path towards lower emissions is based on all fossil fuel types of energy are able to play a role. And nuclear power is back for real in the European energy policy discussions. Apart from more countries taking steps to ensure their own production, we can also see it in the development of the relevant regulations taking on a more technology-neutral orientation. As an EU member, you are bound to uphold democracy and the rule of law. This includes free media, independent courts, as well as a civil society that is involved. And Sweden expects all members of the EU to support that. In every city, you should be able to meet under the rainbow flag without threats of violence or harassment. That freedom is something that we fight for every day. And I know that in this chamber, this government has the wholehearted support of this chamber. And the EU's entire toolbox must be used against countries that compromise or violate the principles of democracy or the rule of law, for example, by holding on to funding from the EU budget, and as an extension of that, by withdrawing the right to vote in the Council of Ministers. Mr. Speaker, in just under a year's time, there will be a general election held here in Sweden. Two alternatives will stand against each other also on these EU issues. We want more simplifications of rules so that it's easier for Swedish companies to do the right thing in Europe. We are pressing for a climate policy that reduces emissions without undermining rural areas and also forestry and exports in forestry. We are pushing for a more restrictive migration policy so that a no is always a no throughout Europe without borders. We will always safeguard Swedish interests in the EU because no one else will be doing that. And these are serious times, but Swedish and European history give us reason to feel hope for the future. We have managed wars and crises before. We have come out stronger at the other end before. Not alone, and definitely not without effort. But together and through hard work, we can do that for a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Tack. Ordet för anförande går till Magdalena Andersson, Socialdemokraterna. Varsågod.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Magdalena Andersson from the Social Democrats.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, 30 years have passed since Sweden became a member of the European Union. It was a time of optimism and belief in the future, where the world developed towards more democracy, more free trade, more peace. Now we are witnessing something different. Mr. Speaker, in our time, the Swedish people see a full-scale war on the European continent. Bombs that continue falling, children dying, houses being demolished. And Ukraine's relentless fight for freedom has made us feel deep respect, and they deserve our unwavering support. Mr. Speaker, in our time, the Swedish people see an American administration rolling out the red carpet for a wanted war criminal, starting a trade war with the rest of the world, and that has changed its views on European security. And the rules-based world order, the order that, since World War II, has given us stability and prosperity, is now being truly challenged. It's a fundamental shift. Mr. Speaker, now world economy also faces other fundamental shifts: customs war, artificial intelligence, and green technology, where large economies now are racing with state support to build the industries for tomorrow. Swedish companies encounter a totally new type of competition where we need action for investments, prosperity, and jobs. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we live in times of war and major changes. And that is when the European collaboration is our safe harbour, and stability, security, and safety to lean on for the Swedish people. A protection against uncertainty in a changed world. And this is why the European Union, possibly never since we joined, has had a more important task to perform than now. I want the European Union to step forward and be the world's strongest voice for a rules-based world order, where rules stand above the right of the strongest, which speaks about international law, for free trade, for a relentless support to Ukraine. Yes, the European Union actually now needs to assume the role as the world's strongest power for democracy. There are forces working against all of this. Foreign powers, pro-Russian right-wing extremists, religious fundamentalists, they are trying to weaken Europe, to divide us and our community. But it happens because they know that European unity is our most important strength. So that it's exactly that we have to cherish. Mr. Speaker, in our times, Europe has to take a greater responsibility for our own security. Therefore, we need to strengthen our military and civil resilience. We need to support Ukraine fully. And in our times, therefore, Europe has to learn from the mistake of our dependence on Russian gas and diminish our dependence on China and other countries. In our times, Europe has to take a forceful step into the race on the industries and jobs for the future. And Sweden has an important role to play in this context. We have to do our share in creating a strong Europe. But right in these decisive moments, Åkesson and Kristersson are about to make Sweden into a sinker in Europe. Sweden now has the third highest unemployment rate in the EU and the third highest youth employment. It's as much as 25%. We have bankruptcies at a level we haven't seen since the 90s. We have lived through years of among the lowest growth levels in the EU. Mr. Speaker, it needn't be like this. We have the preconditions. We could be a growth engine in Europe. We have the innovative companies. We have skilled, well-educated people. We have the natural resources. What is lacking is political leadership, a capacity to lead Sweden in the right direction. Right now, we see the results of the policies from the Sweden Democrats and the government, which is a reverse policy where they lower the taxes for the very richest, while hardworking families have been made into airbags against inflation, where Sweden, as the only Nordic country, has refused to increase the study loans and the child's allowances for hardworking families. This is how Swedish growth has been held back. Sweden Democrats and the government has not only had a reverse financial policy here and now, they also lack a plan for the future, an idea of what we shall live off in the future, how we shall make investments, jobs, high wages become a reality. An idea about how to make Sweden into a rich country, not to develop into a low-wage country. Mr. Speaker, the lack of a plan for the future we also see at an EU level, because within the EU we can strive for Swedish growth by ensuring long-term rules for companies in Sweden. But the Sweden Democrats are instead actively trying to undermine this and tear apart the EU's efforts to become less dependent on China. This is true also for achievements from the Swedish presidency of the EU. Unfortunately, this is in line with the Sweden Democrats' hostility towards new technology, new energy, new Swedish businesses, and thereby against jobs and wages and prosperity. The moderates, a party which used to stand for employment and growth, they have changed when they're adapting to the Sweden Democrats. Sweden, we have all the preconditions to be a country which is in the forefront, not to be a sinker in Europe. But it takes action and political leaderships. It takes a new government.
Tack. Ordet för
Thank you. I give the floor to Henrik Winge from the Sweden Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The major authoritarian states, financial and military strength, their cooperation, their ambitions for power, and their ruthless war-making makes the European security situation very serious. For Europe's democracies, this means that our military cooperation has to deepen. No European country can stand strongly alone. Russia's strength on the battlefield is because they value human life very little. Europe's strength must build on something else, our technology, our ability to produce more and better than our adversaries. This insight builds on lessons learned in the last World War. Brave people fought and died for freedom in Normandy, in Telemark, and in Killarney. But it didn't stop there. In Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Seattle, in factories where the assembly line never stopped, their bravery was shown. Once again, the free world's production forced tyranny to its knees and opened the doors to freedom for all of Europe. And then, if not before, it was clear that in our time, freedom's strongest fortress is a big factory, and only those that can supply themselves can take power and make decisions. And here there's reason to be self-critical. European industry is bearing a larger and larger burden of bureaucracy and regulation, micromanagement. It's in a straitjacket that is binding Europe's hands while the rest of the world shows us how to do things. By putting prohibition and regulation on our own factories, we have pushed production and mining of natural resources out of the country. We need these things, but we have to import them from countries that don't have the same strong regulations. It doesn't reduce emissions. It puts us in a situation that weakens our ability to stand up for ourselves, and it puts us in a situation of dependence to countries that don't share our views on freedom. Without a strong industry and a stable supply of goods, Europe loses its right to make its own decisions. This is not a time to have illusions. When Russian is deciding the future of Europe. Europe needs to sit at the table. We need decisions, political decisions that have been made in Europe. Political greed and social democratic over-government has put our fate into the hands of others. Continuing in this way risks our security. We have to work for a Europe that understands what our time's great threats come from and that acts accordingly. Mr. Speaker, Europe is the cradle of freedom and is the object of contempt for people who live in a embittered abyss. Putin wants us to bow down instead of bearing the costs of freedom, but he is wrong. And this is the historical mistake of despots. They mistake openness for weakness. But democracy doesn't measure its strength in parades or uniforms. They don't think in terms of enemies, but history shows that when democracies are threatened, they stand up with a strength that no dictator in the world can defeat. Mr. Speaker, Europe's historical strength has never come from taxes or over-regulation. It comes from free competition and voluntary competition. Let us defend what we care for. Let us build a Europe that nevermore is a victim of history, but is the strength that shapes the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Nooshi Dadgostar from the Left Party has the floor. Go ahead.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, Sweden used to be the world's best, most equal country. Changes entailed improvements. More and more people could afford to buy new shoes for their kids when the old ones were worn out or too small, or they could take their family on a holiday in the summer. But something has happened. Sweden's households have been robbed of their money. But is that not due to an inflation impulse that has come from the outside? No, actually, it hasn't. Prices have decreased again in the rest of the world, but not in Sweden. Here, they continue to increase. Twice as many people have become poor in Sweden in the last few years. Over 500,000 Swedes live in poverty. The Riksbank's latest report establishes that Sweden stands out compared to the rest of Europe and the United States. Swedes have the least left in their wallets. Only in Portugal are people worse off. Mr. Speaker, I understand the citizens' frustration. Politicians that do not deal with and resolve people's problems. They just talk and talk but do nothing, as if it were some kind of law of nature that forced the government and the Sweden Democrats to dump the cost shock, as it were, on hard-working families. But it is a choice. It's a prioritization. And yes, it is possible to do things differently. The Kristersson prices, i.e. the fact that it costs 3,000 kronor more for a month for a family with children to shop for food, it needed not have been so high. Rents have increased by 17% in the last few years, and that could have been stopped. But the government chose to stand on the side of the banks, the supermarket giants and the property owners. In budget after budget, the moderate party and the Sweden Democrats have chosen to prioritize purely wealthy households. At the same time, they claim that they cannot afford a decent level of housing benefit and that they are forced to raise the cost of medication. The government and the Sweden Democrats have also chosen not to introduce something that the Norwegians already have, the Norwegian prices, i.e. Sweden prices for electricity, so that we pay reasonable prices for the electricity that we produce here in our own country. The government and the Sweden Democrats has thus given rise to the third highest level of unemployment in the EU. This is what happens when the Kristersson prices hit us, consumption is decreased, and there are more bankruptcies. The government and the Sweden Democrats, nor they're doing enough, making enough investments in our countries. There are so many things that need to be done, so many homes that need to be built, so many railway tracks that need to be built, so many healthcare staff that need to be employed. What's lacking is politics to ensure that the job is actually done, and there is money out there. Sweden has now over 540 billionaires, more than ever before. So yes, there is money out there. But from being one of the world's most equal countries, Sweden has become one of the countries in the EU that has the most skewed distribution of wealth. High interest rates has made bank directors richer. And by emptying your purse, the supermarket giants have made huge profits. That's not how things should work in Sweden. It must be cheaper to be Swedish. Politicians must stop passing the buck. The decisions that we make determine whether people are able to pay their rent, put food on the table, whether the healthcare system works, whether more jobs are created, and whether more homes are actually built. We need to get back to what is the core of politics. We have been elected to represent the citizens, so let us do that. Because, the Riksdag feels far away and the EU is even further away. We need to return to the time when people trusted politicians and politics, so it can change our lives. So let me just say to those of you perhaps watching now, you are right. I understand that you're dissatisfied, and I understand that it's difficult to have faith in what is being said here. But let me promise you one thing. The Left Party, we have made our choice. We, the Left Party, will ensure that food prices are decrease, the price of electricity and the grid fee are decreased. We'll ensure that rents and the interest rate will be held back, that Sweden can be built strong and fair again. Thank you very much.
Tack. Ordet för anförande går till Rickard Nordin.
Next we have Rickard Nordin from the Centre Party, please.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, the EU needs more growth and a greener one. That is the only way to reduce emissions at the necessary pace. That is the only way we have a chance of paying the financial and moral debt that we have built up for coming generations. Regardless of whether it's in Milan, Paris, Malmö or Piteå, I know how the conversations are going in Swedish companies. Or in all companies. In boardrooms, they do not discuss whether to transform, but how fast they can do so, because it's the right thing to do. But also because that's a way to gain market shares when we see a transition in the world. When Swedish engineers develop new products, they don't debate whether the next version will be greener and more efficient than the previous one. It's obvious to them, because it's right, but also because it's our unique competitive advantage. The farmer who wants to invest in a new machine always looks for the best one that consumes the least fuel and looks forward to the day there will be competitive alternatives and the fuel can be produced on the farm, because it's right, but also because he or she wants to be a greater part of the solution. The owner of the small haulage firm are still calculating whether it is profitable, in spite of the government's policy, to invest in electrical courier services and to install solar panels and charging stations. They know where the development is heading because it's right, but also because their clients want this, also because they want to be able to look themselves in the mirror and to explain to their children that they try to hand over a better world. These conversations are going on every day in Swedish and European companies, in boardrooms and around the coffee table, in the corner shop and at the large factory. And discussions, plans, investments, they go in one direction only, forwards towards the green transition. The companies are clear about what they need. Targets set high, strict requirements, long-term rules of the game, and a policy which makes it worthwhile financially to invest in what's good for the environment. Therefore, it's truly regrettable that this government does the opposite. They promised to lower the electricity tax, but instead they lower it twice, and then it's at the same level as before the elections. They promised to electrify, but they took away the bonus for eco-friendly vehicles, and now they reintroduce it, even on a much smaller scale. First, they invite to energy discussions, much needed for the companies and the climate, but then they stop them abruptly. We see the results of these stop-go policies. Emissions have gone up and growth has gone down. But decisions made in Brussels, well, they are often just as important, if not more. And we have few fossil resources in Europe. If we continue with fossil energy, then we will be dependent. We will be an import power. We can be stuck in Russia and Saudi Arabia. We could build a clean economy with higher prosperity, but it takes action. And unfortunately, there are worrying signals that the TD parties, they have exported their way of working to Brussels. The Sweden Democrats want to tear apart the climate targets and the tools that we have that could help us achieve them. The Christian Democrats have said they will vote no to Europe's climate targets 2040. The moderate party group, they have spent a lot of time into slowing down the EU's efforts with the climate targets, which means that the EU now goes into Berlin with significantly lowered ambitions with no scientific base. The attitude that the transition should occur elsewhere, well, it's now being baked into the European policy after the climate minister took part in watering down the climate targets for 2040. To believe that electrical scooters in Ghana are better than electric cars in Sweden, well, that is inconceivable to me. If it works with the electric scooters, I say if, maybe it's not a big difference for the climate, but considering air quality, competitiveness, security and jobs, well, that's insane not to make those efforts here. Mr. Speaker, it's not the right time to hesitate in climate markets, nor in the Riksdag nor in Brussels. Swedish businesses are ready, and the European ones, they want to lead the development towards new technologies and lower emissions. All they need from us is that we stand strong when others wish to abandon the climate targets, that we keep what it takes and what science tells us. We need to do the job, and I expect that from everybody in this chamber as well. Thank you.
Tack. Ordet för anförande går till...
Thanks you. Ebba Busch for the Christian Democrats of the floor. Go ahead. Mr. Speaker, let us never forget this. When the EU was born, it was born out of ruins in a Europe destroyed by war, Holocaust, and political extremism. The vision was simple, actually, but grandiose. Driven by the continent's Christian Democrats. No more wars. Countries that had bombed each other to pieces needed to find a way to get past what could not be endured, what could not even been forgiven, to together take control of the military industry's raw materials was a beginning, followed by the belief in meeting each other in cooperation. The European Union, the world's most successful peace and prosperity project, a union of countries who share fundamental values. The EU has given us freedom of movement, freedom of trade, and values that guarantee lives in freedom. But we also have to say that as the EU has grown, some of this has been lost. The EU has become more and more of a bureaucratic project. Freedom, a vision for the future, industrial strength, and the power of innovation has been accompanied more and more by the idea that everything that is not forbidden shall be regulated. Decisions that should be being made at Swedish kitchen tables are being taken at desks in Brussels. Farmers are drowning in forms, and forest owners are getting stuck in law text. Entrepreneurs who want to be innovative are going to other parts of the world. This threatens the whole soul of the Union, its legitimacy. I believe in the EU, but I believe in an EU that sticks to its core task, an EU that gives us hope, not headaches. Mr. Speaker, Europe is being put to the test both from the inside and the outside. The war in Ukraine reminds us why the EU once upon a time was formed. Sweden may not be in war, but Europe is. When our allies to the West are getting more and more unpredictable, Europe must be made strong. The countries of Europe together need to strengthen our strategic autonomy in the military area, in agriculture, and in industry. Let us use the potential in the Swedish mining industry and the Swedish forestry industry to free ourselves from dependence on countries like China. Europe is falling behind, and this gives space to exterior threats, but also interior ones, because with no growth, there is no prosperity. Without competitivity, emissions will not go down. Therefore, the EU has to reduce regulations, speed up permitting, and invest more in research and innovation, because it is not through growth. It is through growth and not through over-regulation and Swedish over-implementation that we can build Europe's future and our strategic autonomy. Mr. Speaker, we can combine decreased emissions with increased growth. The climate cannot become an over-ideology. The transition needs to go hand in hand with financial security for the people. It has to happen with common sense and feeling. I want Europe to take responsibility for the climate challenge, but the EU cannot be turned into the world's biggest deindustrialization project. We need innovation, new technology, and hold on to your hats, we need nuclear power. And we have to manage the transition with our forest owners and farmers, not in a struggle against them. The Swedish forest is not a museum. The forest is a resource that gives jobs, exports, and sequesters carbon dioxide. Mr. Speaker, the EU is not perfect, but it is worth defending, because when we cooperate for the right things based on our common values, Europe is a force for good. There's an EU that stands up for Ukraine, that protects democracy and makes it easier, not harder, to live, work, and run companies. So let us care for the European project by building more trust and more freedom. Let us make the EU to a project for the future in a real pioneering spirit for peace, freedom, and for the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Daniel Helden for the Liberal Party. Go ahead.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, the climate transition is decisive for the competitiveness of Europe, but today it is under threat due to weak leadership. We are at a crossroads. Either we choose the path of short-termism and populism and become ever more dependent on fossil fuels, or we choose the path towards freedom and prosperity through the climate transition. We see how the oil lobby with full force tries to convince indecisive holders of power that the population does not accept any emission-reducing measures at all. The citizens are, on the contrary, clear-minded. A majority of Swedes and Europeans are concerned about the consequences of the climate crisis, and they want politicians to do more. As I said, we are at a crossroads. For the Green Party, the way forward is self-evident. The EU shall be at the forefront, and Sweden shall be a leading voice, not a dampener. However, Mr. Speaker, what about the leadership that we have here at home? Well, the Sweden Democrats gained their inspiration from Orban, Trump and Le Pen. They are pursuing a culture war against climate policy supported by Russian disinformation campaigns and the oil lobby's propaganda. And what about the other TDO parties? The Moderate Party are turncoats. The Christian Democrats are in a populism contest trying to attract voters from the Sweden Democrats. And the Liberal Party are managing the climate policy of the Sweden Democrats. The citizens are, however, clear-minded. They give the government a fail for its climate policy. Satisfaction levels are approaching zero. Mr. Speaker, what we see here is a weak Swedish leadership, and that does have consequences also in Brussels. Just when Europe needs leadership with a backbone, just when we are being challenged by the United States, Russia and China, Sweden retreats. Our voice in favour of human rights is silenced. We are retreating from our position as climate leaders, and we choose to focus on our own narrow interests. It is weak and it is dangerous. The Green Party chooses a different path. We know that reduced emissions are not an obstacle for growth, but the basis of future prosperity. When we change our industries to become fossil-free, we create job opportunities, innovation, and we strengthen our local communities. But for Sweden to be at the fore, we need a leadership that dares take responsibility and share the risks. When the world is investing in green steel and electric cars, the TDO parties are using their time to cast suspicion on companies that take part in the green transition. This type of policy frightens away investment and innovations. The Green Party knows that the path towards freedom and prosperity can only be taken through the climate transition. So now let me highlight 3 ways in which Sweden and Europe can gain from this. Firstly, the green transition ensures future job opportunities and Swedish competitiveness by investing in fossil-free industry, green steel and a circular economy. Sweden and Europe can become world leaders and stop leaving walkover to China and the States. Secondly, renewables and green energy ensure our supply of energy. The sun, wind, hydrogen, these are a path to take away from expensive imports and a vulnerable dependence on fossil fuels that is something that only benefits Russia. And thirdly, in Sweden, through sustainable forestry which goes through the climate transition, that ensures that we can, in fact, hit the targets, and we can ensure that we have more jobs at the local level and that our societies throughout the country work better. We know that at the turn of the last century, we had a forestry sector that was functioning, that it was good when it comes to growth, that developed. We need to be at that level, and we know what needs to be done. Unfortunately, we have a government in place that is retreating into the future, that doesn't understand what Sweden needs in this situation. We need green industry. We need green basic energy. We need electricity, green electricity. We need a forest that gives us a future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tack. Ordet för anförande.
Thank you, Simona Mohamsen for the Liberal Party. Mr. Speaker, once upon a time, it was trendy to be critical of the European cooperation. The left's EU Eurosceptics warned us against free trade and labor immigration. EU opponents on the right warned us for supranationalism and threats to democracy, but these are trends that have aged as poorly as 3D glasses at the movies, because the fact is that the EU cooperation makes Sweden richer and more secure. Richer because Swedish companies can export easier to Germany and France. More secure because Frontex and Europol are protecting our borders and fighting crime. But what really knocked the wind out of the Eurosceptics was the war in our neighborhood. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it put a stop to all nationalists and socialists' mistaken ideas that you would be strong alone, because alone is not strong against Putin or Iran and China. And now Europe must hold on to its support for Ukraine, for peace, freedom, and a future Ukrainian EU membership. Trends come and go, but the Liberals' engagement for a strong Europe, that is durable. Mr. Speaker, the EU is an economic giant, but it risks being passed by North America and Asia. The development of technology moves as quickly as running clubs in a city. It requires Europe to prioritize correctly to strengthen the innovation and prosperity of the future, and we need a clear road forward. A road forward for Europe that builds on more free trade, bigger investments in research and technology, more exchange between European countries, where we together bring in foreign experts to contribute to Europe's innovation so that new ideas and products see the light of day in a tough global fight against the American giants and Chinese copies. And we need common reinforcement against the trade wars of the future and uncertainty. I'm talking, of course, about the euro that holds both small and large countries together when the world shakes. Europe can be the world's democratic and financial role model, but it won't happen with bureaucratic socialism or conservative brakes on things. It happens with more liberalism, not less. Mr. Speaker, a migration that goes hand in hand with integration, that doesn't go hand in hand with integration, leads to shadow societies and exclusion where extremists and gangsters threaten vulnerable people. Sweden is not alone in its challenges in Europe. During the Tea Party's watch, more gangsters are being brought to justice. The migration policy is being readjusted to be responsible and sustainable, and preventive work is being strengthened both in school and social services. The T2 agreements issues policy is a plan for more security and should be exported to every corner of Europe. The EU critics, the EU skeptics, were wrong about European cooperation. In one area after another, the EU has shown and proven that major societal problems can be solved. We did it before, and we will do it again. Thank you. Thank you. The first part of the debate is completed, and we will now move to the second part. I will give the floor to the Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson. Go ahead.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, time and again, foreign citizens are being sentenced for serious crime in Sweden, but they are not deported out of the country. For example, for rape or other different types of violent crime. There are many awful and terrible examples. As everyone knows, this government will never intervene in individual court decisions, but if legislation leads to unreasonable consequences, then laws and conventions need to be amended. Now, we are in the process of producing the toughest legislation on this point. So all crime that gives a sentence of more than a fine will lead to deportation. So we expect that 6 times more people will be deported from Sweden. And we are going further than any government has dared to do before. And we are also putting pressure on countries outside Europe for them to receive their own citizens who've been deported from Sweden, and they have to, and also the conditions of development aid also includes the countries living up to this, and we feel that there's strong support for this, but not from all. The Left Party, the Green Party, the Sem Party, they have all expressed the fact that they do not want Swedish development aid to be conditioned that these countries actually receive their own citizens. Now, for me, safety, security, these are things that are fundamental in one of the world's most equal countries. Now we are, in fact, introducing the reforms that the previous government was unable to do, did not want to do, did not dare to do. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Magdalena Andersson from the Social Democrats, Nooshi and Rickard Nordin and Daniel Heldén from the Environment, the Green Party have requested rejoinders. And this is an EU policy debate.
Mr. Speaker, right now we see the results of 3 years with Ulf Kristersson's financial policies. 100,000 people have lost their jobs. Youth unemployment is 25%. Bankruptcies are at levels we haven't seen since the 90s. Growth is low. And Kristersson would like to blame this on inflation and previous governments, but the truth is that during the last 3 years, Swedish growth has developed far below its potential. Åkesson and Kristersson's policies are making Sweden into a liability for Europe. And the moderates used to be a party that stood for growth and the future. They've changed. Mr. Speaker, I think that I'd like to ask what Mr. Kristersson would have done differently during the last 3 years. Thank you.
Well, there's a very dangerous new trend in the Social Democrats always to speak ill of Sweden internationally. That is very careless and it's erroneous. A high level of unemployment was much higher. When during the 8 years that you were part of the government, when you look at the increase in immigration and also emissions, we do not want to sacrifice Swedish interests for other countries that are less ambitious. And growth happened to decrease 2014, not just due to the government that took power, but now we see small but very important signs that growth is in fact increasing more rapidly in Sweden than other countries, and the tech industry in Stockholm in Sweden is the most vital one in the whole of Europe. And Sweden speak ill of when they speak ill of Sweden abroad, you do not safeguard Swedish interests.
Magdalena Andersson.
Magdalena Andersson, please.
Mr. Speaker, I have a saying, you have to see reality the way it is. You have to tell it like it is, and you have to do what is necessary. Ulf Kristersson thinks we should close our eyes to reality. Youth unemployment that has dramatically increased is now 25%. Close our eyes to the 100,000 people that lost their jobs. I was at Volvo last week in Gothenburg. 1,000 people have been given notice. Growth is far under its potential. A Sweden whose emissions last year increased with the next highest amount of all of Europe, a reality that a extremely satisfied Ulf Kristersson wants us and me and all of Sweden to close our eyes to. That will not happen. I am here to make Sweden better for hardworking Swedish households. Thank you. Final rejoinder, Prime Minister.
Oh, it's so funny that Magdalena, she closes her eyes some years and opens her eyes very much some. In 2022, when the food prices under Social Democrats increased by 18%, inflation was 10%. And now the food prices are not increasing anymore, just a few exceptions. Inflation is decreasing, but she says nothing about that at all. She closes her eyes to the fact that Sweden has the lowest level of emissions in the whole of Europe, possibly together with Malta. But we say no when other countries want to make the most of Sweden's forests, which is to the detriment of Sweden. And she closes her eyes to the fact that growth is decreasing in Germany, but we see that it is, in fact, we see signs that it is increasing in Sweden. It closes her eyes that completely unreasonable immigration policy has led to this mass unemployment level in Sweden. I mean, it's about, closing your eyes and opening your eyes. It's not very impressive.
Tack.
Thank you. That was the end of that round of rejoinders. Next, we have Nooshi Dadgostar from the Left Party, please.
Mr. Speaker, the chairperson of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has promised to get a handle on the crisis of the living and housing costs that have gotten out of hand. The EU now has a housing commissioner and describes it that Europe is suffering from a wide housing crisis after prices have gone up so quickly the last few years. But the government appears to be entirely clueless about this housing debate that's going on in the EU. Here we're going in the other direction. So my question to the Prime Minister is that your party conference recently decided to institute market pricing for all rental housing, which impacted a huge number of renters. Market rates is what you want, and it shows that all studies show that that will lead to shocking rises in rents. Why do you want that when prices could be much lower? Thank you. Ulf Kristersson, the Moderates.
Now, the Moderate Party conference, I don't know where the link to the European Union is, but anyway, you are completely wrong as per usual. But anyway, let's talk about the EU. I attended the council meeting with the issue of houses discussed. It wasn't at all it was very interesting because many countries did point out that housing issues are important, but rarely European in nature. There are a number of people in many cities throughout, and most cities in Europe don't feel that. They believe that it's a national housing policy, that you have national regulations there. However, there are certain traits that are similar in Europe, and there might be regulations that could also be simplified at the European level. However, we could discuss it, but really, honestly, housing issues are not really at the top of the Council of Ministers' agenda and should not be there either.
Tack.
Thank you. Nooshi Dadgostar.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, it is concerning to have a Prime Minister who does not appear to care at all about the housing issue. The EU has now opened the door to changing the rules, which have the private market housing rules, which have stopped Sweden from having a good housing policy. But I'll re-ask this question. At the Moderate Party conference, you decided that the moderates would campaign on the issue of instituting market pricing for rental housing. That means rents will go up a lot. The whole EU is talking about how living and housing costs have gone up far too much. We have to get it down. This is a major question in many European countries. And I'm asking the question that Kristersson has never answered. Why did the moderates decide to campaign for the next election on instituting market pricing for 3 million renters? That's enormously raised prices. Thank you. Kristersson?
Thank you. I have answered that question. We have not put forward such a proposal, and anyway, it's got nothing to do with the European Union at all. So the difference between different the housing markets in different European cities, are huge. You have huge concentrations, small areas, others are completely opposite. Now, if the Left Party, if you want to sort of subcontract Swedish housing policy to the European Commission, let me warn you, about doing that. Now, the Swedish housing policy is far from the Belgian or Luxembourg housing markets. Here in Swedes want to live in their own homes, that they own, and so we need to ensure that people can live in, buy their own homes, and we've seen this you keep trying to work against that. You've done that since the 70s. People need to save money to put a deposit on a flat or a house. You represent the opposite. And be clear on that, please. Thank you. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. Next, we have Rickard Nordin from the Centre Party, please.
Tack så mycket.
Thank you very much. Sweden's emissions have increased since Kristersson moved into the Prime Minister's residency. I understand this is a price you have to pay for the Sweden Democrats' support, but to motivate it the way the Prime Minister does, in that he says that Sweden is on the leading edge and other countries have to reduce their emissions, is unacceptable. We have to take responsibility. The EU, where we together can make a difference, well, the moderate party group has linked arms with the extreme right and wants to see more diesel cars on the roads after 2025. They've lost all connection with the Green Deal. We heard the Prime Minister say that the EU is the arena to fight climate change, but why then is your party group working against offensive climate goals in that arena? Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I suspect that the Centre Party, with this increase, that we reduced the extra tax on fuel, which meant that our fuel prices were the highest in the whole of Europe, which meant it made it very difficult for ordinary Swedes to drive to work during period of time when we had a high level of inflation. And why don't you just say quite openly that you want to go back to that state of affairs and with the prices that we had then? I mean, this is double standards. You pretend to you say one thing and say another. And we have, climate policy, which is at the forefront in the world. We are leaders. We are leaders when it comes to our commitments in Europe as well. And we link climate policy with EU competitiveness. We'll have lower emissions in 2026 than we did in 2022. Why can't you support the policy that you yourselves, if you now criticize the fact that we have done it just slightly easier to be a Swede in a time when costs are high. Thank you. Rickard Nordin, please.
Ulf Kristersson is right in that Sweden is at the top of the list of increasing emissions in the EU last year. We increased our emissions the most of all member states. When we know we have to reduce them, the Centre has put forth a proposal about how we could reach our goals without increasing the prices of fuel at the pump. But it's a ready-made proposal. It's ready to be put into the budget. It could be executed, but the government is not prioritizing it. Instead, they're prioritizing asking someone else to do something somewhere else. We know the EU has great ability to together fight emissions and increase growth, but the moderates want to do the opposite. Why, Ulf Kristersson, is your party group in Europe fighting the Green Deal and climate goals, and why does it want more diesel and gas cars on the roads after 2025? Thank you. Final rejoinder.
Mr. Speaker, when you're the sort of least relevant opposition party, you can say whatever you want, almost what you want, whatever, because it doesn't matter really, because nobody believes in your figures, that you were to be able to cope with all the transport costs without increasing taxes on fuel, etc. How on earth, what about the forestry goals, without sacrificing Swedish forestry? 70 million tons. All parties can agree that that is unreasonable from the European Commission to sacrifice Swedish forestry so that other countries should use Swedish forests as a carbon sink. You tried to sort of work the figures, but I don't think Swedish forestry is very impressed by this, and I don't think you've believed really that it's the Swedish forestry sector that should resolve our problems. If that's what you mean, then be clear about it.
Tack. Därmed var det replikskifte.
That's the end of that round of rejoinders. Now we have Daniel Heldén from the Green Party, please.
Herr talman, okej, vi pratar skog. Moderaterna påstår att
The Moderate Party claims that EU's targets for forests are impossible. I doubt you've even made a try, because for a long time the Tidö government has ignored the fact that the carbon capture in forests is decisive for the climate. Instead, you've spread a false narrative that Swedish forestry should have to be abandoned if we were to reach the targets. But what it takes is a policy which actually is for more carbon storage and more sustainability, and the Tidö government has made nothing. They delivered nothing. They just did nothing. So, Mr. Speaker, I wonder why Ulf Kristersson and his government continue to counteract and go against a sustainable Swedish forestry.
Från Moderaterna.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The government and the Green Party, I mean, we do really have different views, and we stand for that, and I respect that, I do. It's an interesting question is really what the Social Democrats believe about this and how you are going to cooperate when it comes to Swedish forestry. No one knows that, but you shouldn't turn your criticism not to the Swedish government, to the European Commission, because now the European Commission has in fact listened to our hard work in Sweden and in Finland to change the requirements that are in fact being placed on Swedish forestry sector. And we've for the last few years we've driven a campaign to prove that Sweden's forestry can do more good if it replaces other products, if it's allowed to grow, it's felled and then grows again, rather than be standing still and act as a carbon sink for other countries. Now the Commission has understood and listened and has given clear indications at the previous summit that the EU will finally change these rules. We've never said that Swedish forestry should be shut down, but a dramatic decrease in forestry for other countries to get off cheaply is not something that we will go along with. Thank you very much. Daniel Heldén, please.
det är ju allmänt känt att
Well, it's a well-known fact that the government has fought hard for us not to fulfill the targets, the climate targets for the forests, and that's decisive for us to lower our emissions. Sweden has a commitment. We have negotiated it also. We have to do our share. We have a high emission, historically high amount to what we have still to do. Sweden has committed to this, and what you're trying to do is to try to just simply cancel all of this. We have a possibility. Sweden really has a possibility of doing something, and we at in the Green Party, we want a transition to a more sustainable system, bonus-malus system, an agreement on the climate, sort of freedom reforms for forestry owners. And with our policies, we can reach the targets and we can have a sustainable forestry. 350,000 forest owners would do better with our proposal, and at the same time it would make Sweden meet the climate targets.
Herr talman,
Mr. Speaker, firstly, I'd like to correct you. We have not negotiated these. No, on the contrary, the Swedish government voted no to those targets that the EU once established because we believe that they were unreasonable. That's what our government did. Your government would never have done that. At the same time, the EU placed much higher demands on Sweden than many other countries, which in fact meant that we had these unreasonable requirements on Swedish forestry so that other countries can use Swedish forests as their carbon sink. We voted no to that. We supported Swedish interests. We do not sacrifice this. So if Sweden doesn't stand up for Swedish interests in the EU, no other country will do. So the major question here is not what you believe, with all respect, but is what would you force the Social Democrats to do? What would they have to compromise when it comes to forestry policy as a price for the Green Party to be part of a possible future government at some point in the future?
Därmed var replikskiftet.
That's the end of that round of rejoinders with the Prime Minister. We go now back to the speakers list, and now we have Magdalena Andersson from the Social Democratic Party for her 2-minute speech, please.
Herr talman!
Mr. Speaker, during the last 2 years, unemployment has decreased in the rest of Europe. In our country, this situation is different. In Sweden, many fathers have driven home to their terraced house, parked the car, gone in, sat down by the kitchen table, and have had to tell the children that from now on it will be tough because dad lost his job. Since the Sweden Democrats and the Moderate Party gained power, 100,000 more people are unemployed in Sweden. 100,000 of these kind of kitchen table discussions in Sweden. Sweden have the third highest unemployment rate in the EU. We have more unemployed in Sweden than in Greece. It's mass unemployment. Youth unemployment has increased rapidly, and it's now 25%. This is the result of the policies from the government and the Sweden Democrats. It's clear that Swedish households are becoming poorer with them in government. Moderates used to be a party standing for employment, but they have changed. Mr. Speaker, my ambition for Sweden is that we should have higher ambition than making us into a sinker in Europe. I want our country to be a growth engine, a country where everyone who can work should do so. And we should do what we have always done in Sweden. We should say yes to new technology, be in the forefront, so that investments, jobs, prosperity stay here. We support people so they can take the jobs that appear, with a broad agreement on energy, so we really can have the electricity that Swedish industry needs to grow. That is how we can get the investments, jobs and prosperity to Sweden, far away from the mass unemployment policy of the government.
Tack.
Thank you. So we have Henrik Winge, the Prime Minister, we have Christian Diamandis, and the Liberals have asked for a rejoinder. First, Henrik Winge from the Sweden Democrats.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Magdalena Andersson normally talks about a strict immigration policy in Sweden, but at the same time, the Social Democrats voted no to a restrictive immigration policy in the European Parliament, and no to physical obstacles at the external borders of the EU. And Magdalena Andersson's claim that the parties that support her are parties that don't want more restrictive immigration policy. Many municipalities that are run by Social Democrats have said no to a meeting with the coordinator on immigration for people to return to their countries of origin. And also trying to force people to mix by busing kids to schools in vulnerable areas, for example. Why does Magdalena Andersson say that she pursues a restrictive immigration policy, but every time she has a chance to make a difference, she does the contrary?
Tack. Magdalena Andersson, Socialdemokraterna.
Thank you, Magdalena Andersson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Henrik Winge talks about the person who was finance minister in a government that made the largest reduction policy in Sweden 2016. Our Social Democrats, we are for a strict migration policy. We have established this time after time during our party meetings and when we were in government, when we also made a major restructuring, and that is necessary. Europe needs to have a strict migration policy, and Sweden needs it too. And other countries in the EU need to take a greater responsibility than Sweden, because we have taken a great responsibility. What we need to focus on in Sweden now is that people who live here have the right to stay, that they get a job, that the children learn what they're supposed to learn at school and that they get a reasonable housing situation, that we try to get away from the housing situation where you live too many on a too little area. That is how we can make these people integrate.
Tack. Henrik Winge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What Magdalena Andersson is doing now, she's trying to sweep away the traces of her crazy immigration or migration policy that she and her party friends, other parties, have pursued. And the European Parliament, they've voted no to restrictive immigration policy, no to physical obstacles at the external borders, no to international rules to facilitate deportation, and no to also work against Islamistic infiltration in the EU. And now the Commission put forward a new proposal leading to more people returning to their countries that have no right to be in Europe. And this is something that's being negotiated in Brussels. It's a good proposal supported by the Sweden Democrats. So my question to the Social Democrats is whether the Social Democrats are going to vote no once again.
Tack. Slutreplik, Magdalena.
Thank you. So, Magdalena Andersson, Mr. Speaker, Henrik Winge has been quite selective in his list there. Let me once again remind you of the fact that it was a government led by the Social Democrats that made the largest policy change to reduce the budget. And with the Social Democrats, it's also the party that has really tried to have a strict migration policy when it comes to the workforce. We really want a new system, and to achieve something else than the liberal policy that Ulf Kristersson has worked for in his entire life. We want a strict rules and regulation where we look at the need we have for people immigrating to work here. When it comes to returns, with Social Democrats, of course, we think it's good that there can be support to people who want to go back to their original country. If they didn't find themselves in a good situation in Sweden, we have that kind of support. We have had it for a long time. We've actually introduced that as Social Democrats. That's a policy we stand by.
Tack.
Thank you very much. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. Next, we have the Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, please.
Herr talman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Few other EU member states. Sweden has, in fact, provided development aid to other countries without any conditions. And during our term of office, we've had, in fact, done something different. For example, with countries like Somalia, so that the countries should also take back their own citizens if they're going to receive aid, development aid. And we see that the Green Party and the Left Party are against it. Let's just give you some examples of crimes that these deputies have crime. It's rape against children, fraud, murder, etc., grievous bodily harm. Magdalena Andersson, why do you and the parties that support you want these people should remain in Sweden and thus in Europe?
Tack. Magdalena Andersson, Socialdemokrat.
Magdalena Andersson from the Social Democrats.
Mr. Speaker, I heard Mr. Kristersson say to the journalists outside that he would focus on EU matters in this debate. Well, as usual, with Ulf Kristersson, he says one thing and does another one.
Och problemet Ulf Kristersson är ju...
The problem with Ulf Kristersson is not the lack of rhetorical ways of speaking. As Social Democrats, during our time in government, we were also prepared to make use of donor money to or development aid to increase returns and to make countries accept their own citizens. We had discussions, for example, with Morocco when we had Moroccan children on the streets of Stockholm. But bribing, no, that's why we say no. And the government's way of action is like a bribery to an anti-Semite Islamistic regime. Money has gone to relatives of the Prime Minister with salaries of 100,000 Swedish crowns per month.
Tack, statsministern.
Mr. Speaker, it's difficult to interpret Magdalena Andersson's response and then the people from Somalia, they should have remained in Sweden. Now, we, the Swedish government, do not believe that. And as per usual, with the Social Democrats, you've been prepared to do things. If 320,000 immigrants, asylum seekers in Sweden during the period that when you were in power, whether that was strict, well, gosh, I wonder what a non-strict policy would be. 19,000 per year. If that's a strict policy 3 times as today, then one does wonder what is just a just right level when it comes to immigration into Sweden. I mean, these are questions that are important. I mean, ask the Belgian Prime Minister if this is EU issue. It is. The person who killed Swedes in Brussels that shouldn't have been in Sweden or in Europe for that matter. So if Sweden can't keep track of people who commit crimes here that should be thrown out of our country, they also commit crimes in other countries. So few issues involve so many as these at the moment. Thank you. Final rejoinder from Magdalena Andersson.
Mr. Speaker, Ulf Kristersson likes to have a migration historical debate once again. Well, it's not an interest for Ulf Kristersson, or actually history of migration is interesting considering Ulf Kristersson's own impression or footprint in that. And when we talked about free immigration. But of course, having said that, of course, people who commit crimes and serious crimes in Sweden, of course, they should be expelled. We took initiative during our time to make this happen. We used development aid to make this happen. And with me as a Prime Minister, the government will work hard to achieve this or to make this continue happening. For me, that's obvious. I'm not prepared to bribe Islamist, anti-Semitic Hamas supporters. There, we are different, Mr. Kristersson. Thank you. So that finishes that rejoinder. Now we have rejoinder from Rickard Nordin from the Centre Party.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm convinced that Magdalena Andersson, she means well with her support for chat control. The proposal that means mass surveillance and back doors for encryption, for example, that the Ukrainians use. But well-meaning is not sufficient. Expert after expert says that this is a threat against personal integrity, and all experts say that it can be misused by the state for other uses and other purposes, and foreign states can also gain access to private messages for ordinary Swedes. Ukrainians' defense is dependent on this type of service. Explain to me, Magdalena Andersson, why are the experts wrong? And where the defense of Ukraine, where they're going wrong? What is it that they know that we don't know? Thank you. Magdalena Andersson from the Social Democrats, please.
Mr. Speaker, I think I have to be honest and say that these are difficult matters. It's about deciding between personal integrity and fighting crime. And it's apparent that the Social Democrats and the Centre Party, we have ended up in different opinions in that, trying to strike that balance. But the background to this is that it's reported 105 million images of sexual abuse on children over the world. 60% of this material is in the EU. Sweden, 1 child out of 4 are abused, the children under 15 years old, and it can be on the internet. And with this background, we consider that we need sharper, stricter laws. This proposal is not to scan all activity, but there is a certain evaluation of the digital platforms. Our Social Democrats, we support this proposal because we stand up for children.
Rickard Nordin.
Thank you very much. Now, yes, sir, these are difficult matters, but at the end of the day, it's quite simple because these crimes are obviously awful and terrible, but risking the Ukrainian children and their security and their safety by stopping this type of service that the Ukrainian defense is dependent on, that is irresponsible. A backdoor in is a backdoor in. And we can't explain that. We can't adjust the proposal saying that when we're talking about security and integrity, because it's violating that. The whole aim of the proposal is to create backdoors that a hacker or the states can make the most of. I wonder, is it prestige here? Because Ylva Johansson, she was the one who launched this proposal. Don't let the vessel sink. Don't let Ukraine, in well-meaning, sink. It's time to get rid of chat control. Do it once and for all. Thank you. Thank you. Final rejoinder for Magdalena Andersson.
Jag delar inte.
Mr. Speaker, I do not share Rickard Nordin's opinion that it's ill-focused concern. It's about protecting children in the EU, but also children in other countries. It's not about Ylva Johansson. She made an enormous effort in trying to write this proposal, but it's not about that. It's about the children. I share Rickard Nordin's opinion that it's a consideration you have to make and that it's difficult. We have ended up in different opinions, but as Social Democrats, we support this proposal on the background of the horrible and vast sexual abuse on children that we see in Sweden, in Europe, and in the world. It takes a stricter law than we have today.
Tack. Därmed var det replikskiftet.
Thank you. That finishes that round of rejoinders. Then give the floor to Emma Bush from the Christian Democrats.
Mr. Speaker, I thought we'd talk about simplification of regulations because the most important thing in the EU is to get rid of supranationality, supranational regulations, simplified regulations. And I thought the Social Democrats were behind this. But imagine how surprised I was when European social democracy chose a different path with their choice for rules and bureaucracy instead of jobs and prosperity. The Workers' Party became the Rules Party when they voted for the Omnibus 1 package. The Sustainability Directive, which was a thing that increased costs by almost 4 billion per year for our companies. The Parliament follows the government with the smallest possible margin. Why were you against that, Magdalena Andersson?
Självklart finns det.
Mr. Speaker, of course there are rules that we can change and simplify. But this is about, to much too large extent, is rules. We are deteriorating the rules, deterioration which is not good for Swedish companies. This is about requirements concerning climate, it's requirements to make sure that there is no child labour involved. These are requirements that Swedish companies already abide by, and they will continue to do so. But when other European companies are to look into new climate laws or look into child labour, well, that changes the competitiveness for Sweden and it deteriorates. So the risk is we see more child labour over the world. And this law came after 1,000 workers were killed in an accident. That's why they want to secure that there were reasonable requirements. But the question is how the Christian Democrats end up in a situation where we risk the lives of more workers, less rules for the climate and more child labour.
Eva Busch.
Thank you, Eva Busch. Mr. Speaker, the argument is deficient because reasonably there must be some type of middle way between yes to children dying in dangerous workplaces and yes to increased cost for Swedish companies in the amount of 14 billion. What Magdalena Andersson is saying here, if it's correct, why would we contribute to putting such a large burden of costs on Swedish companies? When there is war on European territory, when we see mass bankruptcies in all of Europe because we are squeezing our industry between the USA and China. It is a serious, very serious situation for European competitivity. I'm proud of Jürgen Wahlberg, our European colleague, who negotiated for this in the European Parliament. But there's been a lot of talk and little action from the Social Democrats when you say that you want to increase our competitivity and then vote against the simplification of rules that we need to do at the same time as we could continue struggling against child labor. Thank you. Final rejoinder, Magdalena Andersson.
Välkomna.
Thank you, final rejoinder. Mr. Speaker, I welcome simplification of the rules, but I don't want to see deterioration of the rules that deteriorate the rights, the possibilities to work against or to work for children's rights and other rules that would go against union rules. It's called the deterioration package, meaning that Swedish companies will be less competitive. Swedish workers will have more competitiveness from other countries with low wages, and that decreases the good qualities for Swedish companies, and it will be more of child labor over the world. So simplification of rules, yes, but deterioration of regulations, no, thank you.
Tack.
Thank you. Simona Mogensen for the moderates, or the Liberal Party, has the floor for her rejoinder. Mr. Speaker, the Social Democrats and the Liberals have most often be close to each other in the questions of gender equality. Together, we made Sweden a country where you can get your career to work at the same time as your family for women. Both Social Democratic and Liberal ministers have moved forward and showed this is possible. But Magdalena Andersson, do you share Margot Wallström's opinion that Prime should have given her place away because she couldn't go to the climate summit because she's pregnant? My question to Sweden's first woman prime minister is, does she distance herself from Margot Wallström's statement? Thank you. In this EU political party leader debate, I give the floor to Magdalena Andersson for the Social Democrats. Go ahead.
Well, that comment was up on time, Mr. Speaker. Margot Wallström, well, if I understood correctly, Margot Wallström did not know that Romina Pourmokhtari was pregnant when she wrote that. And I suppose that she would not have written that if she had known. Margot Wallström is a well-known feminist. The problem is not that a pregnant minister could not travel when the negotiations are now ongoing, but why Sweden doesn't have a single minister there. That's not Simona Mogensen's mistake either. It's a matter of leadership. All over Sweden, there are managers to handle the fact that people fall ill. They quit. They are pregnant, or they have to be on parental leave. You just make things work anyhow. But not Ulf Kristersson. Because it's not every minister in Sweden being pregnant. That no one could go. It's all about leadership.
Simona
Mogensen, the Liberals. Mr. Speaker, Sweden has some of the lowest emissions per capita in the EU. That's a fact. Sweden also makes important investments to secure our climate work in the future. That's a fact. So don't try to wave this away, Magdalena Andersson. You have party members who presume that a pregnant minister should follow, who would not have a pregnant minister follow the healthcare recommendation to not go to Brazil. Is this worthy of a Social Democratic Party, Magdalena Andersson? Thank you. I want to point out again that this is a debate about EU policy, but Magdalena Andersson may answer. Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, well, I'd be happy to continue talking about Ulf Kristersson's lack of leadership qualities. Because our Social Democrats, we are no way critical to a pregnant minister not going. But we are very critical to Ulf Kristersson not securing another minister to be there on the spot when there are important negotiations going on. Swedish companies are there. Swedish companies who are in the forefront in climate transition and that want the rest of the other countries in the world also do their part to do the transition so we can sell our Swedish goods on the world market. But now, when these important negotiations are going on, then Sweden stands there without a minister for the first time ever. It's Ulf Kristersson's decision. Or is it? Possibly Jimmy Åkesson's.
Därmed.
Therewith, the exchange of rejoinders as a result of Magdalena Andersson's statement are finished. The floor is to Mr. Henrik Winge for the Sweden Democrats. Mr. Speaker, Sweden has had a stable labor market because we let the parties take responsibility. Through the Saltsjöbaden bond agreement for negotiations and trust, we have historically had fewer conflicts, higher working rate, and more order than in the continent. In Brussels, they think differently. A supranational model is applied there, one size fits all, minimum wages, strikes, labor actions. There is supposed to be an exception that will maintain our model, but you know that will be hollowed out, and the agreement could be torn up at any time. Countries with collective bargaining agreements are a majority, and with time we will be run over by bigger interests. We see the same interests in the Green Deal, with the consequence that small business people are weighed down by heavier and heavier EU bureaucracy. Mr. Speaker, it is unreasonable to force craftspeople and small business people to follow these rules. Every hour that is spent on climate bureaucracy is an hour less doing your work. Fewer invoiced hours means less money for the Swedish economy. The EU has to respect the fact that different countries solve problems in different ways. The Swedish model works. It was built from the grassroots up with parties that take responsibility. Therefore, we need to care for the Swedish model. We need to stop the supranational greed. We need to get rid of unnecessary complications for Swedish companies, and we have to let Sweden continue to make its own decisions about its own labor market. That's how we will strengthen growth and secure jobs in Sweden. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Nushidad Kizstar, the Centre Party, the Environmental Party, and the Liberals have asked for rejoinders. First, Nushidad Kizstar for the Left Party. Go ahead.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, the Swedish people, households, companies pay too much for electricity. We do that because we ourselves produce much more electricity than we consume. The problem is that we have built cables to other countries, and as soon as in Germany, Poland, from elsewhere, they want to buy our electricity, that we have sacrificed territory to build up, then we get higher prices here in Sweden, and maybe they are lowered slightly in Germany or Poland, but that's just in the margin. Therefore, we propose Sweden prices, and we've been tried to achieve that even within the EU. But Henrik Winge's group, they have been against this. They find the system to be good, that we should export electricity and thereby pay that with higher prices in our country. We find that a crazy system. We're totally against the idea that we should produce because that lowers the incentive to do so. Why does Henrik Winge and his party group oppose the idea of Sweden prices?
Demokraterna.
Thank you, Henrik Winge. Thank you. If it was as simple as Nooshi Dadgostar makes it seem, it would be different, but it is not. There is no simple model that would mean that we would get Sweden prices. Additionally, if Sweden isolated its electricity market, we would not have the opportunity to import electricity, which we sometimes need to do because things go up and down as far as needs for electricity. But it's true that the electricity prices are too high. That is because the Social Democrats shut down Swedish nuclear power. We need to build it up again. We need to compensate Swedish people in the short term for these high prices. We're reducing VAT. We're reducing the cost of gas so that you can drive your cars. We are reducing VAT on food prices so that they can be bought. We're reducing a lot of prices. That's how we are compensating for higher prices that basically stem from the mad rule of the left-wing parties earlier. Mr.
Mr. Speaker, well, that wasn't correct maths. We produce more electricity than we actually consume. You can, you can wallpaper the entire region of Skåne with nuclear power, but if we're exporting it to Tyskland, what's the point? If we're 400 billion for a nuclear plant for exporting the power to Germany, we have to make sure that what we invest also is good for Swedish households or companies. Why not? What's the point otherwise? It's just a few years ago the market developed the way it did in the EU. We have cables to other countries since the 90s. It worked fine. But a few years ago, the EU started constructing an electricity market, which meant for Sweden that our prices increased because we have to export to all the others and we have to pay for it. We could keep the export, and when we import, we, of course, should pay the price. It's a few hours per year that we do so. But why should we in Sweden pay so high prices for exporting our electricity, and why do you support that kind of system?
Replik, Henrik Winge.
Thank you. Final rejoinder, Mr. Winge. Yes, thank you. Once again, if it was, as Nooshi Dadgostar says, things would be different, but it is not. That is not how the European electricity market works. It's not so simple for Sweden to isolate itself from the market. If we could, we would, but it's not possible. And that's because we have shut down nuclear power. If we had a stable base line power that we could rely on, things would be different. We don't. We can't. We need to compensate households in different ways. Food prices, fuel prices, taxes, also electricity prices. We're lowering the electricity price now below the 2022 level and trying to compensate for this in different ways. The EU electricity system doesn't work optimally, but what Nooshi Dadgostar is proposing is not possible. Thank you. Therewith, that exchange of rejoinders was finished. The Centre Party has the floor. Go ahead.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, Swedish companies are clear. They want high-set climate targets in Sweden and the EU. They want strict rules that don't change over time. They have invested billions based on those premises. They do not want, they cannot compete with China in selling the cheapest, dirtiest products on the market. The Swedish competitiveness, well, it's about exporting better, greener products. In spite of this, the Sweden Democrats want to tear up the climate policies. Last term, they voted down proposals on this matter more times than any other right-wing populistic party in any. They're doing the lowest in the class. I understand that the Sweden Democrats and Henrik Winge don't care about the climate, but why do they want to sabotage for Swedish companies that only want to create jobs and earn money on green transition?
Thank you, Sweden Democrats. Yes, thank you. The reality is the opposite. The Centre Party and other climate bureaucrats in the EU want to tax companies, take their resources, put them in a big pot, and then let the politicians decide how to split up the money. But we know better. We think that politics, we don't think that politics and should be micromanaging things. We think that different types of things could be steered in different ways. That's the opposite of what should happen. The companies know how they should grow. The companies know what to do. Let the companies make their decisions on their own. Let European entrepreneurial spirit free and take away your greedy political fingers from what they need. Thank you, Rickard Nordin.
Well, actually, I think the Centre Party, we lower the corporate tax more than the government in our budget. We have suggested lowering electricity tax much more than the government and the Sweden Democrats have. This policy from the Swedish Democrats, not at least on the European level, where companies so clearly say that they want long-term rules of the game, strict climate regulation. Well, it damages Swedish growth and Swedish prosperity in the long run, because it's from the companies and what the taxes that companies pay that we get money to healthcare and schools. In the fossil economy, the economy of the Sweden Democrats, well, then Sweden and Europe are depending on import. But in the renewable energy, there will be a winning export country. This is what our businesses and industries have understood, and therefore they are for this. When should the Sweden Democrats put Sweden in the forefront or first, and so we can be part of the game? When should you start listening to Swedish businesses and stop saying no to every proposal for a more ambitious climate policy within the EU?
Thank you. Final rejoinder, Mr. Winge. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The European growth has been much worse, for example, than the American, much because of the greedy politicians. This is what we don't need if we are to compete with the rest of the world. On the contrary, we need to let loose the European entrepreneurship and let Europe grow to produce things. And they won't do that because of the politicians' control. This is the core of our politics. We will be driving this. We want to secure European competitivity in the future. Thank you. Thank you. That exchange of rejoinders is finished. Daniel Hedden for the Green Party has the floor for his rejoinder. Go ahead.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, the Sweden Democrats say no to EU's climate policy, to renewables, and no to investing in green industry. So what you're saying is you're saying no to the economies of the future. So then you have to answer this question. What are we going to live off here in Sweden, in Europe, in the future if we don't have a green transition? Do you, Henrik Winge, believe that it's a good idea to make Europe completely dependent on China for electric cars, batteries, and fossil-free steel? Thank you. Henrik Winge from the Sweden Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, naturally, I don't think that. But there is a type of basic difference here in the Sweden Democrats compared to the Environmental Party and Centre Party's views of this. They think that politicians make better corporate decisions than companies themselves. We do not think so. They think that they should take the company's resources, put them in the pile, and let the politicians divvy them up. They think that the politicians in Brussels should say, this is how you should run your business, this is what you should do. We think those decisions are better made by the companies themselves, the business people themselves. They produce things, let them do it. Take your greedy fingers away. Let the companies drive growth. That's how we will get growth in Europe. Thank you, Daniel Hedden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was interesting to listen to Henrik Winge because the Sweden Democrats, they always want to sort of put a brake on climate transition, do away with the things that made the Swedish companies were, in fact, leaders in this, and that they have damaged their whole business model, actually, how they should be working going forward. And that also ensures that big major corporations that need support from the government and a clear support internationally are locking in the money that the companies need, they want, regardless of whether we're talking about whether it's business minded or not and viable. But in Sweden, we are lagging behind. Europe is lagging behind. We see how China is running past Europe. They are taking market shares, and we will be standing here with an economy which is in retreat, because the Sweden Democrats are putting a brake on the whole climate transition. Thank you. Rejoinder from Henrik Winge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This may be repetitive, but once again, the reason we're having problems is because of politicians in Europe and like Daniel Hedin, who are putting a straitjacket on our companies. If the European companies had had the same conditions as the Chinese ones, European growth would look better. Our political security situation would be better because we would have a greater production capacity. Basically, this is a wrong way to think, a wrong thing to believe that politicians create value. They don't. Companies create value. Let them do that. Take your greedy fingers away from European industry. Thank you. That exchange of rejoinders is finished. Simona Morrison for the Liberals has the floor for a rejoinder. Go ahead.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, Sweden is a small exporting country with a small currency, and our closest trade partners luckily are in the area, in our region, in Europe, countries like Germany, Finland, the Netherlands, as well as France. Now, they have one thing in common. They have a common currency. So my question to Henrik Winge is, wouldn't it be best for Swedish trade and growth that we also make Sweden closer to its trade partners and introduce the euro in Sweden? Henrik Winge for reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I don't think it would, because we can see through history that the Euro cooperation, of course, it sometimes has worked well, been beneficial for countries that were in it, but at other times was very problematic. We looked, for example, at the crisis that had struck Europe called the finance crisis, where different countries in Europe basically went bankrupt and others had to pay the bill. Sweden was very happy to be outside of that with its independent central bank, Riksbank, and its independent fiscal policy. We can't plan for the weather always to be sunny. It won't. Sometimes it will be raining, and we will be happy that we have our own currency that we can fall back on. Thank you. Simona Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it is in fact for rain and the bad weather that I'm putting this question. The euro is much more than just a common currency. It is this whole idea. It's like an insurance against trade wars and uncertainties. It's, if you like, it's a ticket to the negotiating table with important trade partners with Sweden, for example, Germany and Finland. It lies in the interest of Sweden to become a part of the Eurozone, which is why my question to Henrik Winge is, the Sweden Democrats, are you prepared to rethink when it comes to the Euro and when the situation in the world around us would require it, just as you did when it came to NATO, when Russia invaded Ukraine? Thank you. Final rejoinder, Henrik Winge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our understanding is that the Swedish currency has served Sweden well, and it will continue to do so. We are well served by being able to take our own fiscal policy decisions in times of trouble. Right now, the world is in an uncertain situation. All the better that we can make our own decisions, because if we look at what happened during the finance crisis, Sweden was very, very well served by having its own currency. Then if we had not, we would have been struck much harder, which would have harmed Swedish growth, led to higher unemployment and higher costs. But we didn't have to deal with that because we had our own currency, and we should be glad of that. Bad times will come again, and we will once again be glad to not have joined the Euro corporation. Thank you. That exchange of rejoinders is finished. We will go back to the speakers list. Nushidad Gostar for the Left Party has the floor. Go ahead.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, for the climate and for the sake of the climate, for the sake of the economy, we need to make major investments. Railways need to be expanded and become the best in Europe, because now we are in fact one of the worst. Our railways are worn out, maintenance is lagging behind, and there are huge problems with capacity. Austria, on the other hand, they are taking more state control over railways and are constructing high-speed trains. And in Germany, they have a 60 euros month card for travel by train in the whole country. And while they're doing that, the government and SC are doing nothing. In Sweden, we allow other states to drive our trains instead of doing it ourselves. Now, according to an EU regulation, Sweden must build double tracks on the East Coast track. It's something that Ulf Kristersson promised the electorate before the last election, but he failed there too. Now, we need to invest in railways, and this is necessary in order to get people to choose to go by train rather than flying. And so the government is allocating 528 million on these unprofitable regional airports instead of investing in railways. And the 0.1% richest people, their emissions are 45 times higher than the low income bracket. They would need to reduce their emissions by 99% if we're going to achieve the climate targets. And we could start, in fact, by banning private jets within the EU. Then we would really come quite far. Now, the climate transition must be fair. It's not ordinary people who should pay the price so that Ulf Kristersson and his friends can live as if there was no tomorrow. Sweden needs to be at the forefront when it comes to development of technology, create new modern job opportunities, have a proud industrial state which isn't put in submission to vis-a-vis the major states. That is what we're going to fight for. Thank you. The following have requested a rejoinder: Nordin, Ebba Busch, and Sarah Mohammedsson. First, we have Richard Nordin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Europe is in a difficult situation. Russia is making war. There's sabotage, disinformation. The economy is doing badly, and China is overtaking us. There are right-wing populists trying to divide us. Now more than ever, we need a strong, united EU that shows that we can still solve problems together. What is the left party doing in Europe? Are they taking responsibility, putting time towards solving societal problems? No. They are looking at a new commission without realistic alternatives. They've taken several initiatives against Ursula von der Leyen, the commissioner. They're trying to throw sand into the machinery. There are two problems here: the Sweden Democrats on the right wing and the left party on the left. Why are you not being responsible instead of obstructing things? Thank you, Nooshi Dadgostar.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that it's the Centre Party asking this question, because one can ask yourself whether it's me or the Centre Party that are in this Parliament are preventing a stable majority from changing the situation for Sweden, the direction of Sweden, because we want if you want the EU and Sweden to become a continent where we produce our own cars, where we ensure that we produce the new green products. We are an industrial nation. We need to be proud of that. We must be proud of that. We need to invest in that and go for that, which is why railways need to be expanded and to be linked across the whole continent. This is why we need to change the energy union of the EU so that we can get energy prices down for small companies, but also for major Swedish industry, because we need to produce cars, batteries, steel here in Sweden or in other parts of the continent, but preferably in Sweden. That is what we support. Thank you very much. Richard Nordin from the Centre Party, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that vision is something that Centre Party shares as well. We've spoken about this many times. Growth has to increase, emissions have to go down. And in the European Parliament, if anywhere, the Centre Party and the liberal groups have shown that it is possible to find compromises both on the right and the left with cooperation that is stable in the center of political politics. That is a problem in this chamber, that we have gotten stuck in bloc politics. So the question remains, if we want to open up to this vision that Nooshi Dadgostar so well articulates, we have to find compromises, solutions, and cooperate with others. You can't link arms with the extreme right, the far right, and just obstruct things. So how will you do that, Left Party? How will you open up the vision if you don't want to cooperate with others? Thank you. Thank you. Final rejoinder, Left Party, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, we would like to cooperate with many. I cooperate happily with the Centre Party, because the Centre Party, you say no to both the extreme right and the left. Then you're a bit on your own in the middle, aren't you? So yes, absolutely. I will stretch my hand out to you, Rickard Nordin, so that we together can invest in our own infrastructure, so that we together can invest in research and development of technology, so that we together invest in new energy production, in an electricity market that we have control over ourselves, which is not deregulated and which does not lead to very high electricity prices, because then we will fail when it comes to expanding our industries. These are important issues, and I really, really do hope that the Centre Party wants to be on board together with me on that journey. Thank you very much. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. Next, we have Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats, please.
Mr. Speaker, the Left Party is happy to talk about security and safety, but concretely votes no to EU legislation that protects our citizens against terror, crime, and ID fraud. We voted for safe ID cards. They voted against the EU safe identification system, where other countries can finally do what the rest of the world has done for decades. We can use fingerprints and facial recognition to stop people from coming into our country who want to harm us. The Left Party voted against stopping visa freedom when it is misused for illegal immigration. Why does the Left Party do this? Thank you very much. Nooshi for the Left. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, we will always support safety, stand up for that. That's the most important thing that we have, and for the rule of law as well. But we will also stand up for people being able to put food on the table, so that people have a job to go to, so that we can ensure that we have growth in our economy, but also in the rest of Europe. We will not stand in an election campaign saying that we will reduce food prices and then increase them by 30%. We are not going to stand during an election campaign and say that we're going to make it cheaper to be a Swede and then, in fact, make it extremely expensive to be a Swede. We will do things differently. And there's always a balance to be struck there when it's about the rule of law. How much can you control people? How far can you do that on the internet, in other parts of our lives? Because we do also know that the powers that be can be changed, and power can be misused as well. Ebba Busch, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We note which party leaders think it's really tough to be having an EU political debate, but the EU is very important for Sweden. And I think it's odd that Nooshi Dadgostar, Mr. Speaker, is so extremely uncomfortable with my questions here that she suddenly starts talking about completely different things. I also think that people need to have food on the table, jobs to go to, and growth, as Nooshi Dadgostar brought up. And I look forward to the election campaign next year, where Nooshi Dadgostar can explain to the Swedish people why she is against ordinary Swedish working families having 5,500 crowns more per year in their wallets, thanks to our politics. But why did you vote against more secure entry and exit systems with fingerprints and facial recognition of people? Why are you against this? Why are you for Swedish elderly people being defrauded? Thank you. Nooshi Dadgostar, the Left, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, Ebba Busch, if you're disappointed by answering your question on security in Sweden on the continent. I just answer your question. I answered the questions that she raised. So Ebba Busch, perhaps she feels uncomfortable, and she promised to reduce prices, but they increased by 30%. Instead, she promised that it would be cheaper to be a Swede, but it's never been as expensive to be a Swede. Maybe that was the problem and what was uncomfortable in this round of rejoinders, because naturally we need to ensure that we have systems when it comes to travel in and out. We need to do everything we can to ensure that banks should take a greater responsibility to ensure that the elderly, but also other people, are never, ever subjected to bank fraud. This is something that we have fought very hard for here in the Swedish Riksdag, perhaps hardest of all, to put a stop to this. The banks need to take a greater responsibility. We will always stand up for the rule of law, for safety and security, and for the fact that people need to be able to put food on the table. Thank you very much. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. And the final round is with Sara Moamson from the Liberal Party, please.
Mr. Speaker, both I and Nishidad Gistar have a connection to Gothenburg, a trading city that long was Sweden's port to the rest of the world. From the East Indian Company to Volvo cars, my question to Ms. Dagostar is, isn't it time for the Left Party to do what is best for Gothenburg and take a position on a strong trading currency like the euro? Thank you very much. Nishidad Gistar for the Left. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for this fantastic question. We, the Left Party, as long as I'll be the party leader, we will always support Gothenburg, always, and Volvo, because this is very central for us. And that is why we want to invest in Sweden. We want our cars to be manufactured in Sweden. We want our batteries to be built in Sweden, created in Sweden. And this is why we need to invest in our infrastructure. We need to invest in research, energy production. We need to invest in Sweden. We believe it's more important to do that than that I and Simona Moamson, that we receive huge tax cuts, or the 540 billionaires have the greatest tax cut of all. I think it's important that ordinary people have money in their purse so that we can invest in Sweden and in Gothenburg. Let's expand railways. Let's ensure that it becomes cheaper to travel by public transport. Thank you. Simona Moamson from the Liberal Party, please.
Mr. Speaker, this is not standing up for Gothenburg. A business country like Sweden should be closer to EU countries. We would gain from that, such as Germany and France. They have the euro as their currency. It's an important insurance against tomorrow's trade wars and conflicts. The Liberals, we therefore want to future secure Sweden's place within the EU, and we want the euro as our currency. My question for Nooshi Dadgostar remains: does the Left Party believe that the Swedish crown functions as enough of an insurance against the future trade wars? Is that what you tell all people in Göteborg?
Dadgostar, Vänsterpartiet, varsågod.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals never disappoint, do they? They want to move so much power, as much as they can, from Sweden to Brussels. But we don't believe that bureaucrats in Brussels shall, in fact, manage our monetary policy. This is something that we can manage ourselves. We are proud of it. It means that we are able to determine things ourselves. It's not EU bureaucrats in Belgium that understand what's needed here in Gothenburg, in Stockholm, in other parts of the country. So we say no to transferring power from the Swedish people to these very friendly but unfortunately unknowledgeable bureaucrats in Brussels. We will not do that because we are convinced that if Sweden is going to become a stronger industrial nation in the future. I mean, we used to be in this, but we need to become stronger. We need to invest more in our own country, not make people poorer like this government is doing. Thank you very much. That's the end of that round of rejoiners. And the next speaker is Rickard Nordin from the Centre Party, please.
Herr talman,
Mr. Speaker, just imagine that the state would be opening all your letters, every single envelope, photograph, every postcard, that the state would be listening to all your phone calls and save all this somewhere in an archive. Or just imagine that the state's microphones, cameras would track your conversations with your friends at the dinner table. But if I said this, you wouldn't believe that this is 2026 Sweden, is it? No, you would rather think that it was 50 years ago and it was a country behind the Iron Curtain. But this is exactly where the path of government wants us to take. So we're not talking about, it's not perhaps ordinary letters, but it's WhatsApp and Signal instead. And this is despite the fact that all the experts say no to this, companies say no to this, and the Swedish people say no to this as well. Signal is an important messaging service for the Ukrainian defense. How do you think it would have been if we had built in a back door for a good hacker or authority to get in? How do you think the opposition in Hungary is going to be treated if the government there has access to all the messages that they send with each other? The road to hell there are there's good ideas along the way on the road to hell, but the consequences of this are serious. But the consequences are difficult to see. Actually, for me in the Centre Party, it is self-evident that we need to pull the emergency cord, and we also need to stand on the barricades. We will never accept mass surveillance of Swedish citizens, regardless of the aim of this or the technology that you use, because we know that it doesn't end there. So I would like to end here and my participation in these party leader debates to get my friends here in this Riksdag to think again. Ulf Kristersson, Ebba Busch, Simona Moms and Magdalena Andersson. I know that you have invested a great deal of prestige in this, and I understand that it is difficult as well, but let's get rid of chat control once and for all. Thank you very much. So there'll be a little bit more debate for Rickard Nordin because Ebba Busch has requested a rejoinder. Ebba Busch, please, the floor is yours.
Herr talman, tack för...
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much. There was a time when the Centre Party and Mr. Fälldin was led by the question, how will this affect people, such as farmers and forest owners in Ramsvik? The Centre Party continues to speak big words about forests and countryside, but in practice, the Centre Party, unfortunately, they have lost their compass. The Emma Wiesner in the Europarlament for the Centre Party, she has defended the need for a new forest surveillance law. We've seen how forest policies is deviated in the EU, and they sort of miss out of Swedish interests. So how can you in the Centre Party defend a new surveillance law of forests, and at the same time you vote against simplifying of regulations when it concerns the heavy regulations for forests? How should the farmers in Ramsvik understand this?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, the fact of the matter is that the proposal that the Commission has put forward, or had put forward, it was very difficult and a problem because we've learned by now that the Commission and the EU, they will not retreat when it comes to forestry policy. They'll find different ways, and they've done it this time too. What we did was to put forward a proposal that was better. That meant that we could use the data that exists in Sweden, use that and continue building on the Swedish model instead of having EU centralized systems that the Commission proposes. But the right here in Sweden voted against that and instead of blocking new legislation at that level. I mean, there's a risk because the risk is that things will become worse for the forestry users in Sweden or farmers in Sweden. Because we said no, because it was too far-reaching. Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats, please.
Herr talman,
Mr. Speaker, I understand that your defence method is strategy, but things have not improved for Swedish forestry thanks to this. I mean that the Centre Party are not serious when it comes to forestry and simplifications and improvements that the industry so desperately wants. We voted no, because it was not clear how the implementation would be. And now we really want this implementation to be as good as possible. But the Centre Party instead have voted yes to a change of power, a transfer of power, where you measure and surveillance that you give that gets you power, and it's given that power to the European Commission. The Centre Party also indicated destruction of forests and felling of wood. Where felling also can be classified as the destruction of forests. This is totally against Swedish interests, and it's deplorable that the Centre Party actually chose another path now than they did for Swedish forests as late as the last term.
Centerpartiet, slutreplik, varsågod.
So the final word, Centre Party.
Now, the government's line there to obstruct doesn't work, does it? Had you instead accepted our proposal where we make use of the data that we have in Sweden, then we would have had a much better possibility to have an impact and exert influence. But the worst of this is that the forestry owners, they are really badly affected by this government's climate policy. The EU goals are clear. We need to reduce emissions in agriculture, in forestry, in transport. And when it comes to fossil fuel emissions, when it comes to the machines used in forestry, I mean, and it's and farming, they are huge. Then they will be impacted when we see that we're going to be paying fines, EU fines. We know who's going to be paying for that, don't we? It's agricultural sector, it's the forestry sector, because of the failed climate policy of the government, and that they'll be paying for that. Thank you. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. And next we have Ebba Busch for her 2-minute speech, please.
Herr talman, EU...
Mr. Speaker, the EU is not only a commercial union, it's about values. And Europe has grown without the Jewish Christian ethics and the humanism that follows from this. Values that have united us and shaped our way of living. But today we see how this is threatened. Russia wants to force us down on our knees through the war in the Ukraine and to be dependent on energy. China can push us through their control of critical raw materials in the world. Countries that don't wish us well, they attack us and try to influence. We see how extremism, anti-Semitism and Islamism are growing under our so-called tolerance. To be for European values means to stand up for them in action, to not let streets and European cities be filled by anti-Semitism, not to let parallel structures and honor values get a grip, not to let an Islam that doesn't want to adapt to gain ground in our cities, to protect children and their freedoms, even on the internet, from evil forces who want to shape their thoughts and values. We have to have the energy to stand up against this, because when we let go of our values, we let go of the soul of and the future of Europe. Mr. Speaker, Europe was built on the conviction that the humans and people need liberty, but liberty requires responsibility, because without these values, EU is just an empty shell. But with our common values, we can build hope for an entire continent. Thank you.
Tack så mycket, och på Ebba Busch.
Thank you so much. And then after Ebba Busch, I give the floor to Daniel Heldén from the Green Party, please.
Tack, herr talman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, in her role as Minister for Trade, Ebba Busch is, of course, very interested in the transition of industry. But what is her view on the Sweden Democrats? So they are working against this and are pursuing a cultural policy against individual industrial companies in Sweden, when the rest of Europe is being taken over by the electric cars coming from China, and when it comes to green steel as well. Ebba Busch, do you believe that the Sweden Democrats and their rhetoric actually is something that's good for our competitiveness? Mr. Speaker, do you really believe that this is something that attracts more investors to Sweden? Thank you very much. Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats, please.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to show respect for this chamber, but this type of questions, well, I don't lend myself to that. If you have a question to the Sweden Democrats, please ask your question. But we don't behave the way we did in this chamber in 2006 or 2010. My time is too important to do that. Thank you, Daniel Heldén from the Green Party.
Well, I'm surprised that the Minister for Trade doesn't want to speak about trade policy issues in this chamber when you cooperate with a party that wants to sort of freeze money that was for companies that have the possibility, or for a company, and you can read international press, you can read the Financial Times, and where you have investors quoted there, irritated by the Swedish government making things difficult, lives difficult for these companies. The Financial Times reports that the Swedish government have sent signals to investors that they need to keep away from green transition by not approving funds for Stegra. So my question, therefore, to the Minister is, Minister, are you satisfied with the government being pointed out as putting the brakes on things and combating the industrial green transition of companies in Europe? Thank you very much. Final response from Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, and I am happy that that is not the correct image internationally. I was just in Singapore and just returned from there. It's a small but smart country, just like Sweden, small but smart, is what we said when we were there in English, where Sweden was acclaimed again because we're world leaders, absolute world leading, and we should be proud of that as Sweden. We're on the second in the world on innovation, and we attract heavy investments in Sweden. It's not just one single company, because one company can do well or bad. No, we see this, it's broad. We see the agreement that with Siemens Energy, for example, which will mean increased revenues for the Swedish state to our common welfare and security. But they will also have another agreement that we signed just now in Singapore about. So I'm very happy that we take step by step to reinforce our Swedish growth, and we can notice that on the international level.
This is the end of this round of rejoinders. Next we have Daniel Heldén for his second address, please.
Herr talman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, while this debate is ongoing, the countries of the world are meeting for the COP30 meeting, but no Swedish minister is present. Now, Sweden used to be a leading force. We were the country that put pressure on other countries with regard to stricter climate targets, took initiative with regard to green investments, and that other countries actually looked up to. Now, this government delivers silence, doubts, and empty chairs as well. At the same time as global emissions are hitting new highs, the EU's countries have just agreed on new climate goals for 2040, but are at the lowest level possible. This really shows how urgent political courage and leadership are. Mr. Speaker, at the climate meeting, the leadership of rich countries and their credibility are being tested. Keeping what your promises, reducing emissions, and contributing to the funding of the global transition. Now, the EU has for a long time been the strongest voice when it comes to raising our ambitions in international negotiations. However, if the EU is going to continue being a leader, then the member states all need to go in the same direction. And when Sweden doubts things and call climate goals into question, then not only our influence is reduced, but in fact the influence of the whole of the EU. Mr. Speaker, this is a time when the world needs climate leadership. We don't need doubts, which is why the Green Party will continue to put pressure on others and to ensure that Sweden once again will be a voice for the future, for solidarity and for fair climate transition. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats and Simon Månsson from the Liberals have requested a rejoinder. First, Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats, please.
Mr. Speaker. Oh, that was a change. I never stood here before. The Green Party. Is it okay if I stand here? Yes, thank you. Well, back to the fantasy world. The Green Party live in the fantasy world. It's a world where transition is against competitiveness and growth, where it's important with complicated rules rather than being for industry, defense industry, and the capacity to decide for ourselves. And that's dangerous. But it's a result that the Green Party voted against simplifying rules. And it's clear from our party, we have to reduce emissions but increase growth. So when we look at complicated rules, we must realize that there are impediments for companies, forestry, where they want to reduce fossil fuels and also improve the situation for farmers. Can we have a net zero? Can you promise a net zero, that you're talking about zero companies and zero forestry and zero activity? Daniel Helldén from the Green Party, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know. Ebba Busch, you were talking about 2006 or 2010 and the climate, and then, I don't know, I think she was thinking about other things. I know that, actually. But are you insinuating that the Green Party wants to close Swedish companies when the only thing we're doing is we want to develop Swedish companies and businesses, that we want to ensure that we are competitive vis-a-vis the rest of the world? And we see how China is running past Sweden, and the government is trying to dismantle our goals, climate goals, trying to create an industrial climate, which means that we will not grow going forward by very much. Now, these rules simplification of rules that we've spoken about earlier here during this debate at the EU level, these are actually really about allowing the possibility for child labour, for example, that targets and goals with regard to the climate are not included in global trade, and making human rights something that we do not safeguard. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Ebba Busch, please, from the Christian Democrats.
Tack, herr talman.
Thank you, Speaker. But it sounds as if the Green Party has misinterpreted the net zero concept, because if you listen to Swedish industries, but also industries around Europe, this is really serious. You don't know if you can continue in your activity in Europe, and if you can see an increased growth in Europe, if we continue to add this burden, all these regulations for the companies. And it's very strange to state that you have to choose between more to increase costs for companies with 14 billions or to say yes to child labour. I mean, it's just a false affirmation. It's not true. We stand up for human rights. We do so frenetically. But I think that Daniel Helldén here should say clearly to Swedish businesses, yes, the Green Party thinks it's great if you get an increased burden with 14 billions more. We think that's good, and we think that adds to enhancing the competitiveness for Swedish industries and forestries. Thank you, Daniel Helldén, for your final rejoinder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very interesting to listen to Ebba Busch, who does not want to stand up for these rights which are actually in the legislation. And if she wants to tear that up and make it easier to trade and import things without actually taking into account the rest of the world and human rights, amongst other things, and child labour. Now, it's interesting to listen to her insinuating that forestry would be damaged by our policy, where we have put forward a forestry policy which actually means that we managed to achieve our targets when it comes to the climate and improve the situation for our forestry owners. 300,000 forestry owners will have more choice, and they will have more support from the state when it comes to more sustainable forestry. And we also see in this context how the government instead says that it's the major forestry companies, they are the ones that should continue exploiting the forests in the wrong way. We are making it possible for Swedish forestry owners at large. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. And now we have second address, the round of rejoinders by Simona Moamsan, please.
Herr talman,
Mr. Speaker, I'd rather stand to the right of the Green Party, but I guess I'd have to stand here. Mr. Speaker, it's black. We see it so clearly after the Green Party Congress. Sweden and Europe need more fossil-free energy production. Then the Green Party clearly says no to Swedish nuclear power. Not only The Green Party say they are decided to fight all efforts to expand the nuclear power. My question to the spokesperson is, how do you think that Swedish companies and families should get more fossil-free electricity without new reactors?
Daniel Heldén.
Thank you so much. Daniel Hedden, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it is interesting, this discussion about nuclear power. I think we should look at the world around us and what's happening. 90% of all new electrical production in the world that is being built is renewable. Wind and solar. 10% is other things where the majority is not nuclear power, just a little part is. So what Sweden is doing with this government is to go in the entirely wrong direction. What's cheap and can be done quickly is renewable. Nuclear power is extremely expensive. We'll be sending the bill to Swedish households, and they're going to be sitting there and have to pay this off over 40 years if the project even succeeds. Also, what you're talking about are small modular reactors, and there aren't any available for purchase on this market. So it'll be exciting to see what you manage to do in the coming 11 months. Thank you very much. Simona Moensen, the Liberals, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, the spokesperson finds this interesting and thinks that we should have a look out in the world. Well, let's do so. Europe and Sweden need more fossil-free energy production. That, not the least after it was apparent that Russia invaded Ukraine. The Liberals tried to achieve Europe without Russian gas. And then nuclear power has a decisive role. My question remains for the spokesperson, how shall Europe get rid of Russian gas with the opposition to nuclear power from the Green Party? Thank you so much. The final rejoinder from the Green Party and Daniel Heldén, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the first thing, Europe needs to stop importing Russian energy. That's very important, and we're well on the way as far as LNG, but we need to stop all import of fossil fuels from Russia. That is very necessary. We have to do it. From Brussels, and the government, therefore, should stand up for this. Then the question is, how do we secure the energy supply we need? Well, we just look at the rest of the world. 90% of what is being built is renewable. We can look at what's happening in China, for example, where there is an enormous explosion of most of all solar power, and they're expanding the possibility of storing that in the long term. What this government has done, the government is doing, and the Minister for Commerce is doing, is trying to encourage nuclear power instead of renewable. We have 4 lost years in Sweden. Thank you very much. That exchange of rejoinders is over, and the floor is to Simona Moensen from the Liberals. Go ahead. Mr. Speaker, a number of countries are now gathering together so that Europe will have an orderly, fair, and safe migration policy. Because today's migration system does not work. It contributes to a shadow society where people do poorly, where people are exploited by people smugglers, cartels, and untrustworthy employers. In Sweden, the Liberals and the government have started a paradigm shift for sustainable migration. And like our Liberal friends in Denmark and the Netherlands, the Liberals want the EU to get the resources it needs to reinforce Europe's exterior border. Only criminal forces gain through this unfair migration policy. The smugglers that exploit desperate people, who send families and children on deadly routes over the sea and mountains. Here as well, we need a stronger Europe to handle cross-border problems. The Liberals want to strongly expand Frontex to stop smugglers who subject people to deadly risks. An orderly, fair, and safe migration policy starts and ends with Europe's exterior borders. Thank you. Thank you. And that was the last speech in the EU political debate. Thank you to all participating party leaders and party representatives. The debate is therefore finished and interpretation finishes here. Thank you.
Från sammanträdet onsdagen den 22 oktober. Svaret är ja. Punkt 3 till 5. Anmälan om fördröjda svar på interpellationer. Jag anmäler att svar fördröjts på interpellationer enligt föredragningslistan. Punkt 6. Anmälan om granskningsrapport. Jag anmäler att en granskningsrapport från Riksrevisionen